Good morning, class 9. Today we are going to start a new chapter in history. The name of the chapter is Forest Society and Colonialism. Why deforestation? The disappearance of forests is referred to as deforestation. Deforestation is not a recent problem. The process began many centuries ago. But under colonial rule, it became more systematic and extensive. Let us look at some of the causes of deforestation in India. Land to be improved. In the colonial period, cultivation expanded rapidly for a variety of reasons. First, the British directly encouraged the production of commercial crops like jute, sugar, wheat, and cotton. The demand for these crops increased in the 19th century Europe, where food grains were needed to feed the growing urban population and raw materials were required for industrial production. Second, in the early 19th century, the colonial state thought that forests were unproductive. They were considered to be wilderness that had to be brought under cultivation so that the land could yield agricultural products and revenue and enhance the income of the state. Sleepers on the tracks. In the early 19th century, oak forests in England were disappearing. By the 1820s, search parties were sent to explore the forest resources of India. Within a decade, trees were being felled on a mass scale and vast quantities of timber were being explored from India. The spread of railways from the 1850s created a new demand. Railways were essential for colonial trade and for the movement of imperial troops. To run locomotives, wood was needed as fuel, and to lay railway lines, sleepers were essential to hold the tracks together. From the 1860s, the railway network expanded rapidly. As the railway tracks spread through India, a larger and larger number of trees were felled. As early as in the 1850s, in the Madras Presidency alone, 35,000 trees were being cut annually for sleepers. The government gave out contracts to individuals to supply the required quantities. These contractors began cutting trees indiscriminately. Forests around the railway tracks started disappearing. Plantations. Large areas of natural forests were also cleared to make way for tea, coffee, and rubber plantations to meet Europe's growing need for these commodities. The colonial government took over the forests and gave vast areas to European planters at cheap rates. These areas were enclosed and cleared of forests and planted with tea or coffee. How were the lives of the people affected? Foresters and villagers had very different ideas of what a good forest should look like. Villagers wanted forests with a mixture of species to satisfy different needs: fuel, fodder, and leaves. The forest department, on the other hand, wanted trees which were suitable for building ships or railways. They needed trees that could provide hardwood and were tall and straight. So, particular species like teak and sal were promoted and others were cut. In forest areas, people use forest products, roots, leaves, fruits, and tubers for many things. Fruits and tubers are nutritious to eat, especially during the monsoons before the harvest has come in. Herbs are used for medicine, wood for agricultural implements like yokes and plows. Bamboo makes excellent fences and is also used to make baskets and umbrellas. A dried scooped out gourd can be used as a portable water bottle. Almost everything is available in the forest. Leaves can be stitched together to make disposable plates and cups. The Siadi creeper can be used to make ropes. The thorny bark of the simar tree is used to grate vegetables. Oil for cooking and to light lamps can be pressed from the fruit of the mahua tree. The Forest Act meant severe hardship for villagers across the country. After this act, all their everyday practices, cutting wood for their houses, grazing their cattle, collecting fruits and roots, hunting and fishing, became illegal. People were now forced to steal wood from forests, and if they were caught, they were at the mercy of forest guards who would take bribes from them. Women who collected fuel wood were specially worried. It was also common for police constables and forest guards to harass people by demanding free food from them. How did forest rules affect cultivation? One of the major impacts of European colonialism was on the practice of shifting cultivation or swidden agriculture. In shifting cultivation, parts of the forest are cut and burnt in rotation. Seeds are sown in the ashes after the first monsoon rains, and the crop is harvested by October November. Such plots are cultivated for a couple of years and then left fallow for 12 to 18 years for the forest to grow back. A mixture of crops is grown on the plots. In central India and Africa, it could be millets, in Brazil, manioc, and in other parts of Latin America, maize and beans. European foresters regarded this practice as harmful for the forests. They felt that land which was used for cultivation every few years could not grow trees for railway timber. When a forest was burnt, there was the added danger of the flames spreading and burning valuable timber. Shifting cultivation also made it harder for the government to calculate taxes. Therefore, the government decided to ban shifting cultivation. As a result, many communities were forcibly displaced from their homes in the forests. Some had to change occupations while some resisted through large and small rebellions. Who could hunt? The new forest laws changed the lives of the forest dwellers in yet another way. Before the forest laws, many people who lived in or near forests had survived by hunting deer, partridges, and a variety of small animals. This customary practice was prohibited by the forest laws. Those who were caught hunting were now punished for poaching. While the forest laws deprived people of their customary rights to hunt, hunting of big game became a sport. In India, hunting of tigers and other animals had been a part of culture of the court and nobility for centuries. Many Mughal paintings show princes and emperors enjoying a hunt. But under colonial rule, the scale of hunting increased to such an extent that various species became almost extinct. The British saw large animals as signs of a wild, primitive, and savage society. They believed that by killing dangerous animals, the British would civilize India. They gave rewards for the killing of tigers, wolves, and other large animals on the grounds that they posed a threat to cultivators. Only much later did environmentalists and conservators began to argue that all these species of animals needed to be protected and not killed. New trades, new employments, and new services. While people lost out in many ways after the forest department took control of the forests, some people benefited from the new opportunities that had opened up in trade. Many communities left their traditional occupations and started trading in forest products. This happened not only in India but across the world. For example, with the growing demand for rubber in the mid 19th century, the Munduruku people of the Brazilian Amazon, who lived in villages on high ground and cultivated manioc, began to collect latex from wild rubber trees for supplying to traders. Gradually, they descended to live in trading posts and became completely dependent on traders. In India, the trade in forest products was not new. From the medieval period onwards, we have records of Adivasi communities trading elephants and other goods like hides, horns, silk cocoons, ivory, bamboo, spices, fibers, grasses, gums, and resins through nomadic communities like the Banjaras. With the coming of the British, however, trade was completely regulated by the government. The British government gave many large European trading firms the sole right to trade in the forest products of particular areas. Grazing and hunting by local people were restricted. In the process, many pastoralists and nomadic communities like the Korava, Karacha, and Yerukula of Madras Presidency lost their livelihoods. Some of them began to be called criminal tribes and were forced to work instead in factories, mines, and plantations under government supervisions. New opportunities of work did not always mean improved well being for people. In Assam, both men and women from forest communities like Santhals and Oraons from Jharkhand and Gonds from Chhattisgarh were recruited to work on tea plantations. Their wages were low and conditions of work were bad. They could not return easily to their home villages from where they had been recruited. Rebellion in the forest. The people of Bastar. Bastar is located in the southernmost part of Chhattisgarh and borders Andhra Pradesh, Orissa, and Maharashtra. The central part of Bastar is on a plateau. To the north of this plateau is the Chhattisgarh plain and to its south is the Godavari plain. The river Indravati winds across Bastar east to west. The number of different communities live in Bastar such as Maria and Muria Gonds, Dhurvas, Batras and Halbas. They speak different languages but share common customs and belief. The people of Bastar believe that each village was given its land by the earth and in return they look after the earth by making some offerings at each agricultural festival. In addition to the earth, they show respect to the spirits of the river, the forest, and the mountain. Since each village knows where its boundaries lie, the local people look after all the natural resources within that boundary. If people from a village want to take some wood from the forests of another village, they pay a small fee called Devsari, Dand, or Man in exchange. Some villages also protect their forests by engaging watchmen, and each household contributes some grain to pay them. Every year there is one big hunt where the headmen of the villages in a pargana meet and discuss issues of concern including forests. The fears of the people. When the colonial government proposed to reserve two-thirds of the forest in 1905 and stop shifting cultivation, hunting and collection of forest produce, the people of Bastar were very worried. Some villages were allowed to stay on in reserved forests on the condition that they worked free for the forest department in cutting and transporting trees and protecting the trees from fires. Subsequently, these came to be known as forest villages. People of other villages were displaced without any notice or compensation. For long, villagers had been suffering from increased land rents and frequent demands for free labor and goods by colonial officials. Then came the terrible famines in 1899 and 1900 and again in 1907-1908. Reservations proved to be the last straw. People began to gather and discuss these issues in their village councils, in bazaars and at festivals or wherever the headmen and priests of several villages were assembled. The initiative was taken by the Dhurwas of the Kangar forest, where reservation first took place. Although there was no single leader, many people of the Gunda Dhur from village Nethanar as an important figure in the movement. In 1910, mango boughs, a lump of earth, chilies, and arrows began circulating between villages. These were actually messages inviting villagers to rebel against the British. Every village contributed something to the rebellion expenses. Bazaars were looted. The houses of officials and traders, schools and police stations were burnt and robbed, and grain redistributed. Most of those who were attacked were in some way associated with the colonial state and its oppressive laws. William Ward, a missionary who observed the events, wrote, "From all directions came streaming into Jagdalpur police, merchants, forest peons, schoolmasters, and immigrants." The British sent troops to suppress the rebellion. The Adivasi leaders tried to negotiate, but the British surrounded their camps and fired upon them. After that, they marched through the villages, flogging and punishing those who had taken part in the rebellion. Most villages were deserted as people fled into the jungles. It took 3 months for the British to regain control. However, they never managed to capture Gunda Dhur. In a major victory for the rebels, work on reservation was temporarily suspended, and the area to be reserved was reduced to roughly half of that planned before 1910. The story of the forests and the people of Bastar does not end there. After independence, the same practice of keeping people out of the forest and reserving them for industrial use continued. In the 1970s, the World Bank proposed that 4,600 hectares of natural sal forest should be replaced by tropical pine to provide pulp for the paper industry. It was only after the protests by the local environmentalists that project was stopped. New developments in forestry. Since the 1980s, governments across Asia and Africa have begun to see that scientific forestry and the policy of keeping forest communities away from forest has resulted in many conflicts. Conservation of forests rather than collecting timber has become a more important goal. The government has recognized that in order to meet this goal, the people who live near the forest must be involved. In many cases across India, from Mizoram to Kerala, dense forests have survived only because villages protected them in sacred groves such as Sarnas, Devarakudu, Kan, Rai, etc. Some villages have been patrolling their own forests, with each household taking it in turns instead of leaving it to the forest guards. Local forest communities and environmentalists today are thinking of different forms of forest management. So, children, this is all about this chapter. Thank you.